Are the Amazons much more than legends? Welcome to Kazakhstan, where history comes to life, and every video immerses you in the fate of those who have shaped the world. Today, get ready to cross the veil of time and follow in the footsteps of the Amazons, those legendary warriors who allegedly defied empires and forged their kingdom at the edges of the known world. From the wild steppes of the Caucasus to the sacred shores of the Black Sea, their name resonates like a song from a forgotten era. Between the gleam of spears and the fierce freedom of their oaths, their fate was written in the fire of myth. Queens by arms, sovereigns by will, they embodied the audacity of a people seeking independence. For millennia, their legend has fascinated, but what does it really hide? Before embarking on a new adventure, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss anything. Thank you, and have a good trip. At the turn of the late Bronze Age, between around 1200 and 900 before Christ, profound upheavals shook the Mediterranean world and beyond. Let's start with the region that will be most affected by the collapse of the great powers, the Eastern Mediterranean. At the end of the 13th century before Christ, this area was dominated by several kingdoms and empires, including the Hittites, based in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and the Mycenaeans, who occupied part of mainland Greece. The Hittites had been forming one of the largest empires of the Near East since the 17th century before Christ. Their capital, Hattusa, was located not far from the present-day Turkish city of Boğazkale. This empire rivaled with Egypt of the New Kingdom, notably under Ramses II, and maintained complex diplomatic relations with various kingdoms of Syria and the Levant. The Hittite power was founded on an agricultural economy and a network of vassals who paid tributes and provided soldiers. Their influence also extended over trade routes, notably those linking the Black Sea and the Levant, thus ensuring the circulation of metals like tin and copper, essential for the manufacturing of bronze. The Mycenaeans, on the other hand, constituted the most powerful civilization in Bronze Age Greece, extending between approximately 1600 and 1100 before Christ. Their political centers, such as Mycenae, Pylos, or Tiryns, are famous for their fortified palaces, tholos tombs, beehive-shaped tombs, and their rich funerary deposits, including weapons, jewelry, and tableware. The Mycenaeans also developed a script, Linear B, used notably in palace administration for keeping accounts and inventories of goods. They actively traded with various Mediterranean populations, exchanging oil, wine, ceramics, and textiles. The Linear B tablets discovered on archaeological sites testify to both the sophistication of this society and its bureaucratic organization. Between 1200 and 1150 before Christ, a series of events sometimes referred to by historians as the collapse of the Bronze Age led to the successive fall of these great powers. The Hittites saw their empire disintegrate, likely due to multiple factors: external military pressures, internal political instability, and food crises. Populations coming from the north, which some accounts linked to the Sea Peoples, weakened trade routes and attacked the coasts. The royal archives, once carefully maintained, disappeared with the destruction of Hattusa. The Hittite Empire would not survive this, and its former territories were divided into several smaller Neo-Hittite kingdoms scattered across Anatolia and northern Levant. The Mycenaean civilization was also subject to upheavals at the same time. The grand palaces were abandoned or destroyed. As centers of power and hubs of a redistributive economy, these palatial complexes did not recover from these destructions. The exact causes of the Mycenaean collapse remain debated. Internal wars, external invasions, natural disasters, earthquakes, famines, and disruptions in trade could all have contributed. Whatever the case, The immediate consequence was a decline in literacy and a political fragmentation of Greece. Populations dispersed and new political entities emerged. Many urban sites and fortifications were deserted, paving the way for a period historians traditionally call the Greek Dark Ages. However, even in these times of retreat, occasional exchanges and contacts with neighboring regions continued, slowly preparing for the emergence of the future archaic Greek civilization. This general collapse also affected other Aegean and Levantine areas. In Cyprus, Syria, or Canaan, instability was evident. The interconnected international economy of the late Bronze Age unraveled. Ancient cities were depopulated while new entities emerged, sometimes less centralized. The Phoenicians, for example, consolidated their urban presence in several city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos, and would soon spread their alphabet throughout the Mediterranean basin. To the south, Egypt itself came under pressure from the Sea Peoples during the reigns of Merimta and Ramses III, who eventually repelled these invaders, but not without heavy losses. The new kingdom of Egypt was shaken, and after the 12th century before Christ, Egypt also entered a phase of political decline. We can now broaden our perspective to simultaneous global contexts. In East Asia, the Shang dynasty, ruling over China from about 1570 to 1046, before Christ, was at its peak during the second half of the second millennium. This period was marked by remarkable advancements in bronze metallurgy, used for producing ritual vessels, weapons, and tools. Archaeology has revealed many sumptuous objects with refined iconography, reflecting a royal power embedded in strong religious dimensions. The Shang rulers considered themselves as intermediaries between the celestial world and the human community. Oracle bone inscriptions illustrate the sophisticated administration and divination system of this time. However, this dynasty would eventually be overthrown around 1046 before Christ by a new political entity, the Zhou, who established different socio-political models. On the American continent, we find the nascent Olmec culture in Mesoamerica, a region corresponding to present-day Mexico and its surroundings. The Olmecs developed primarily around the Coatzacoalcos River basin in the Gulf of Mexico from about 1200 before Christ. Although this date coincides with significant Mediterranean upheavals, the Olmec world developed independently, without direct contact with the civilizations of the Old World. Considered the mother culture of Mesoamerica by several historians, the Olmecs are especially renowned for their monumental colossal head sculptures, remarkable artistry, and complex city-states like San Lorenzo and La Venta. They had a long-term influence on subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations, such as the Maya, Toltec, and Aztec. Their society was highly hierarchical, relying on powerful religious elites and an agriculture based on maize, beans, and squash, vital crops for the region. In sub-Saharan Africa, it is the Nubian Empire of Napata that reaches its peak, just south of Egypt. Nubia, called Kush in some ancient sources, has always maintained close and often conflicting relationships with its larger Egyptian neighbor. It experiences a phase of prosperity when the Egyptian power is weakened. At the end of the New Kingdom in Egypt, Nubia gains more autonomy, and its center of power shifts around the city of Napata, located near the fourth cataract of the Nile. The Nubian rulers then develop an art and culture that, while assimilating some Egyptian elements, also assert their own identity. It is from there that, several centuries later, the so-called Kushite dynasty will emerge, which will even rule over Egypt as the 25th dynasty, between the 8th and the 7th century before Christ. But already, during the period in question between 1200 and 900 before Christ, the Napata Empire benefits from dynamic river commerce, sometimes extending into sub-Saharan Africa, while maintaining a tenuous but real connection with the Nile Valley. Finally, a third important movement takes place in the Pontic and Caucasian steppes, that is, in the vast area that extends north of the Black Sea and around the Caucasus. These regions are characterized by a strong equestrian and pastoral tradition where the mobility of populations is facilitated by horse breeding. Communications there are more diffuse than in large sedentary empires, and some specific legends and oral traditions emerge. It is at this time that the first stories mentioning warrior women appear, which will later inspire the myths of the Amazons in Greek tradition. The peoples of the steppes indeed develop a military culture, in which women are likely to participate in battles, raids, and diplomatic exchanges. Archaeological discoveries, much later, will reveal in some graves mixed burials, where women are buried with their weapons. This suggests that the legendary framework of a combative femininity has its roots in these nomadic societies. In parallel, towards the end of the second millennium before Christ and the beginning of the first millennium, there is an increasing mobility of Scythian groups, presumed ancestors of the Scythians, that Greek and Latin authors will later depict. The Scythians are a group of Iranian language peoples, known for their mastery of horseback riding, mounted archery, and for their sometimes aggressive contact with sedentary worlds. At this stage, the early Scythian migrations are not yet precisely documented by writing, as these peoples do not practice it. However, archaeological clues, burial analyses, and later indirect testimonies suggest that clan or tribal movements are already occurring in the western steppes. The causes of these migrations can be multiple: the search for new pastures, pressure from other nomadic peoples further east, the necessity to form commercial or military alliances, or the opportunity to take advantage of the relative collapse of the large sedentary empires to the south. The legends of warrior women also begin to take root at this time. Many nomadic societies value the participation of women in certain military tasks, which gives rise to stories recounting the exploits of these female fighters. In this context, oral traditions take on crucial importance. They are passed down from generation to generation and cross, through migrations, geographical and cultural borders. These traditions offer a powerful symbolic reservoir, which will later be found in Greek literature in the form of the myth of the Amazons. It is possible that these stories, conveyed by merchants, adventurers, or other travelers, gradually transformed upon contact with Ionian or Aeolian culture to give birth to semi-legendary figures of warrior women. In any case, these legends testify to the social realities of the steppes, where the harsh life and horseback riding are accompanied by a relative flexibility in the distribution of gender roles. In the 9th century before Christ, as Greece was going through what is commonly referred to as the Homeric period, a set of oral traditions took shape, giving birth to great epics. The stories that posterity would attribute to Homer, particularly the Iliad, stand out as the major witnesses of this era. They constitute a vast reservoir of stories, myths, and allusions to exotic peoples. Among these peoples, the famous Amazons have stirred considerable interest since antiquity. Emblematic of cultural difference, embodying an ideal of female bravery, they remain, for many Greeks, a source of both fascination and strangeness. To understand the genesis of their myth during the 9th and 8th centuries, it is necessary to first examine the passages where they appear in the Iliad. The first allusions to the Amazons in Greek literature are traditionally found in two parts of the Iliad, the great epic poem dedicated to the Trojan War. While the central narrative features legendary warriors, Achilles, Hector, Agamemnon, Odysseus, and focuses on the battles between the Achaeans and the Trojans, it nevertheless remains punctuated by hints of other conflicts that preceded or accompanied the siege of the famous city of Troy. The chants Tu and Zisex contain brief, often enigmatic mentions of the Amazons. These brief insertions, though not extensively developed, already illuminate the narrative and symbolic function associated with these warrior women. In Chant the Two, which presents the famous Catalogue of Ships, the poet enumerates the allied contingents and figures. Among these different groups, there is a quick mention of heroes who fought against women referred to as equal to men, often translated as equal to men in valor. This first glimpse is crucial for understanding the Greek perception of the Amazon. They form an external enemy at the edge of cultural normality, yet possess martial qualities exceptional enough to rival male warriors. Implicitly, the code of otherness emerges. The Amazon is immediately described as a foreign figure, sometimes coming from vaguely defined geographical edges, while exhibiting courage equal to that of Greek heroes. The second mention, found in Chant 6, appears as a historical reminiscence when the old king Priam, conversing with Helen, recalls great expeditions of the past. He alludes to a conflict during which the Trojans were confronted by these formidable women of Asia Minor. Again, the poet emphasizes the strangeness of the Amazons, reinforcing the idea that they are a distinct people outside the Greek patriarchal system. They seem to indicate the existence of a different world on the margins of the oikoumene, the Greek term for the inhabited world. To grasp the genesis of the myth of the Amazons, it is necessary to understand how the epic was transmitted and under what conditions it was disseminated. During the period corresponding to the 9th and 8th centuries before Christ, Greece was not yet politically unified. There was a multitude of autonomous city-states, decentralized kingdoms, not to mention populations living on the shores of Asia Minor, this vast coastal region roughly encompassing the west of present-day Turkey. In this context, epic poems circulated and enriched themselves primarily through oral performance by itinerant singers, the Aedes. These talented storytellers, often accompanied by a lyre or a cithara, traveled from city to city to sing about the legendary feats of heroes. The importance of the Aedes in the formation, preservation, and transformation of the motif of the Amazons cannot be underestimated. Over the course of their performances, they wove references to these warrior women into their long recitations, possibly adding new details gleaned during travels or under the influence of other storytellers. In the Greek cities of Asia Minor, such as Ephesus, Miletus, or Smyrna, there was a conducive environment for the meeting of various oral traditions from local populations or currents coming from further east. Merchants, sailors, and diplomats traveling towards Phrygia, Lydia, or farther into the Anatolian hinterland could bring back astonishing stories of unknown tribes. It is therefore not surprising that the Amazons, perceived as partly originating from the Pontus Euxinus, Black Sea region, found particular resonance in the imagination of these Ionian coastal cities. When oral tradition gradually becomes rooted in poetic versions that eventually get recorded in writing, probably starting from the 8th century before Christ, although the dating remains debated, the motif of the Amazons emerges already amplified and partially codified. This dissemination is also driven by competition between city-states seeking to assert their own identity through foundational narratives. Some of them, including cities of Ionia, will claim descent from a heroic ancestor who fought or encountered the Amazons. Thus, the reputation of these warriors is both fueled and reshaped by the numerous oral accounts circulating along the Aegean Sea. In parallel, Asian or Anatolian epic often develops specific colorations and details. One frequently finds indications that the Amazons might be allied with great mythical entities like the Phrygians or come from mountainous, forest-covered heights. Certain themes crystallize: their nomadic equestrian life, their skill with the bow, their socio-political organization often described as matriarchal, or the idea that they were under the protection of a warrior goddess, sometimes identified with Artemis or a similar Anatolian deity. All these variations nourish the Greek imagination, which, from the Archaic period, perceives them as formidable rivals, capable of standing up to the bravest warriors. To conclude this exploration of the genesis of the myth, it is essential to address the linguistic questions surrounding the very name, Amazon. Today, the most known and most debated theory remains the one suggesting that the term comes from the Greek expression amazos, literally meaning without breast. The idea, popularized in antiquity and picked up by some classical authors, was that the Amazons cauterized or removed a breast, often the right one, to be more comfortable when drawing their bows. This interpretation seeks to explain the etymology by seeing the privative prefix a, followed by mazos, the Greek word for breast. However, this hypothesis, although popular, has been widely challenged for several reasons. Firstly, from an anatomical point of view, it has been argued that simply removing a breast is not particularly advantageous for using a bow, and that representations of warriors with intact chests in Greek figurative arts often contradict this legend. Secondly, from a linguistic perspective, the root mazos does not formally appear in all ancient forms of Greek, and it is difficult to establish an irrefutable etymological chain that leads to this explanation. Moreover, the sobriety of the prefix a does not always correspond to the prosodic uses in the formation of complex composite Greek terms. Consequently, modern historians and philologists have proposed other avenues. One of these suggests that Amazon might derive from a root of Anatolian origin. The geographical proximity of Asia Minor populations indeed supports the hypothesis that the Greeks would have adopted a local name and subjected it to phonetic Hellenization. Several words from these ancient Anatolian languages contain sounds similar to maza or maison, which might potentially designate a human group or a specific social status. Forms reconstructed by some linguists suggest a meaning close to warrior people or people of the river, although with the fragmentary nature of direct sources, only cautious hypotheses can be made. Another line of thought is based on the idea that the element maison might be related to the concept of maza, a Greek word that designates a type of barley cake. This could refer to a group that eats in a certain way or produces a certain type of bread. However, this theory appears less convincing to most specialists, as it does not align well with the martial character of the Amazons as depicted in epic tales. Nonetheless, the very existence of these diverse linguistic scenarios demonstrates the extent of curiosity sparked by, and still surrounding, the origin of these legendary warriors. In the 7th century before Christ, the Greek world underwent significant political, artistic, and social changes that constitute what is known as the Archaic Age. It is during this period, approximately spanning from the 7th to the 6th century before Christ, that new forms of artistic expression emerge, notably Attic black figure pottery and major mythological tales crystallize. Among these tales, the theme of the Amazons, legendary female warriors embodying a radical otherness, grows in popularity. It is then portrayed in vase paintings, epic chants, and oral stories that circulate among different Greek city-states. The representation of Amazons in art and literature serves both as an illustration of male heroism and as a showcase for a Greek model centered on the city, order, and hierarchy. Towards the end of the 7th century before Christ, Attic ceramics gradually adopt the black figure technique. The potters and painters of Athens, eager to distinguish themselves from the Corinthian workshops, which were previously very influential, develop a singular style in which the figures, painted in black, stand out against a reddish-orange clay background. In this new style, combat scenes become a favored subject. Both mythological battles and idealized historical battles are depicted. Among these scenes, those featuring Greek warriors opposed to armed women, identified as Amazons, generate great interest for the audience of the time. The term Amazonomachy specifically refers to these representations of battles between Amazons and Greek heroes or Hellenic troops. On Attic vases from the 6th century before Christ, one observes silhouettes of female warriors, often wearing Oriental or Asian costumes, with tight tunics, Phrygian caps, a conical headgear, and sometimes fitted trousers. This iconography clearly evokes a distant geographical origin, generally located on the eastern shores of the Aegean Sea or in the regions at the limits of the Black Sea. Vase painters seek to emphasize the strangeness of these warrior women by highlighting a costume they associate with non-Greek peoples. Archaeologists and art historians see in this a method of staging cultural otherness. The Amazon becomes a symbol of a foreign threat, against which the Greek hero must triumph. The combat scenes themselves adopt dynamic compositions. Several vases show one or more Amazons attacking on horseback, as equestrian skill is one of the dominant attributes of the myth. The warrior women wield bows, spears, or double axes, according to traditions from the mythical repertoire. Facing them, one finds a Greek hero, sometimes wearing a Corinthian helmet and holding a round shield, often adorned with a protective motif. The visual contrast between the Greek weapons and those carried by the Amazons underscores the idea of a confrontation between Hellenic civilization and barbarian peoples. This type of decoration on vases was appreciated not only for the dramatic power of the scene, but also for its narrative value. Each vase could recall a famous legend or recount a specific episode celebrating Greek victory. The citizens and aristocratic elites of Athens appropriated it as a symbol of their collective identity, reflecting the triumph of order over any form of chaos coming from outside. Among the most striking myths of the Archaic Age is the episode of Hippolyta's girdle, often considered one of the 12 labors of Heracles. In mythological tradition, Hippolyta is described as the queen of the Amazons, reigning over a distant territory. The girdle she possesses is a prestigious object, symbolizing her royal power and warrior status. According to the most widespread version, Eurystheus, the king of Tyrans, who imposes his trials on the hero Heracles, orders him to obtain Hippolyta's girdle to satisfy his daughter's whim. Consequently, Heracles sets out for barbarian lands, comes into conflict with the Amazons, and ultimately seizes this sacred girdle. Far from being reduced to a mere mythological event, the quest for Hippolyta's belt has been the subject of numerous interpretations. Politically, some experts see it as a metaphor for the maritime colonization practiced by the Greeks in the Archaic period. Indeed, Heracles' departure to inhospitable lands to collect a precious treasure is reminiscent of the expansionist drive of Athens and other city-states which, from the 7th century before Christ onwards, founded trading posts and colonies around Asia Minor or the Black Sea. In this context, the hero's victory over Queen Hippolyta illustrates the success of Greek navigators or merchants in establishing themselves in these distant regions. Another key figure in the mythical struggle against the Amazons is the hero Theseus, often considered one of the founding fathers of Athens. While he is famous for having slain the Minotaur on the island of Crete, Theseus is also associated with a war pitting the Amazons against the city of Athens. Legend has it that during one of his expeditions, Theseus abducts or seduces, depending on the version, the Amazon Antiope, a sister or close relative of Queen Hippolyta. This act provokes the wrath of the warrior nation, which then decides to invade Attica to retrieve their queen or avenge the affront. Thus, a true Amazonomachy unfolds at the gates of Athens, a crucial moment in an epic tale that contributes to the formation of the city's identity. Antiope's role is crucial in this story. In some versions, she falls in love with Theseus and follows him to Athens of her own free will. In others, she is forcibly taken and ends up feeling loyal to the hero. In any case, Antiope's presence in the city of Athens marks a major reversal. It is not just the hero who triumphs over a female adversary, but the warrior allies with his cause, establishing a bridge between these two worlds. In some versions of the legend, Antiope dies from a spear thrust while trying to protect Theseus or the city of Athens. Her tragic death seals the Athenian victory over the Amazon army. This story, fundamental to Athenian culture, expresses the symbolic conflict between two forms of social organization. On one side, there is Amazonopolis, a society dominated by female warriors, living according to their own laws and principles. On the other, there is Polyandry, the idealized Greek city, governed by male authority and the cult of the goddess Athena, protector of wisdom and defensive warfare. The clash between these two principles results in the victory of Athens, considered not only a military triumph, but above all as proof of cultural and moral superiority. This foundational dimension is reflected in the festival of the Panathenaea, a religious and civic celebration dedicated to the goddess Athena. During these festivities, processions, sporting competitions, and theatrical performances were often organized, evoking the exploits of heroes, including Theseus. According to some historians, the battle against the Amazons might have been among the glorified episodes, thus reminding spectators of a common heritage, united around the protection of the city. In the 5th century before Christ, Greek tradition experienced a new surge in the epic retelling of major mythological episodes, including those of the Trojan War. This war, reputed to have taken place several centuries earlier, is then reimagined by poets and playwrights seeking to introduce memorable figures into it. Among these figures, the Amazon Penthesilea holds a central place. Her involvement in the conflict between Greeks and Trojans arouses fascination and generates numerous comments. Daughter of Ares, the god of war, according to some mythological versions, she is depicted as the intrepid sovereign of a people with customs strange to the Greeks. In the literature of the 5th century before Christ, whether in late epic fragments, oral tales spread by bards, or allusions in theatrical works, Penthesilea's arrival under the walls of Troy perpetuates a motif of feminine, martial otherness, already outlined in earlier tradition, but now enriched by a deeper questioning of the heroine's valor, bravery, and beauty. According to the most widespread version, Penthesilea presents herself as an ally of the besieged city. The Amazon queen arrives in Troy to lend support to the old king Priam. Ancient authors, interested in the contrast between the bravery of the Amazon women and the Greek phalanxes, emphasize the singularity of her arrival. Penthesilea does not stay on the sidelines of the battlefield. She instead joins the fiercest combats. The Greeks, accustomed to tales of confrontations mainly between male heroes, Achilles, Ajax, Diomedes, or Ulysses, discover through the poems and plays of the 5th century that the enemy figure can be that of a princess with unshakable courage. This role reversal, where a woman takes on the role of the formidable champion, fuels the curiosity of the Greek public. Above all, both the exceptional beauty of Penthesilea and the combat agility she exhibits are highlighted, illustrating the tendency of authors of the time to create complex heroines embodying a synthesis of martial power and a magnified femininity. At the heart of this epic reinterpretation is the tragic duel between Penthesilea and Achilles. The Homeric Iliad, written a few centuries earlier, does not describe the scene in detail, as Penthesilea does not appear in it. It is in later epics of the Trojan cycle, such as the Aethiopis, a work attributed to the poet Arctinus of Miletus in the 7th century before Christ, now lost, that the combat would have been narrated. By the 5th century, the details of this confrontation were circulating in Greek culture. The fierce bravery of the Amazon is mentioned, riding through enemy lines, shooting arrows, or wielding the spear with a dexterity equal to that of the greatest heroes. Achilles, in his role as an invincible warrior, represents the ultimate obstacle to Trojan victory, and faces a feminine figure who challenges him without flinching. The struggle is intense and illustrates the epic ideal of single combat. But the tragedy arises when, at the moment of taking Penthesilea's life, Achilles is struck by the beauty of his victim. According to some interpretations, he falls madly in love with her in a cruel moment of clarity, making the queen's death all the more pathetic. This scene, as reported or imagined by authors of the 5th century, generates numerous comments on the thin line between romantic attraction, military victory, and the horror of war. The fascination with Penthesilea is also part of a broader dynamic, the literary construction of the ideal Amazon. In the 5th century before Christ, Greece experienced an artistic and intellectual effervescence. The great tragedians, such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, or Euripides, took hold of myths to reflect on the human condition, civic values, or the opposition between nature and culture. Even though no tragedy exclusively dedicated to Penthesilea has survived in full, representations of warrior women abound in speeches and on Attic vases. The Amazons appear as an inverted mirror of Greek society, which was based on a clear separation of male and female roles. In the Greek psyche, the Amazon thus embodies a triple exoticism. She is foreign to the city, a woman in a domain reserved for men, and connected to unknown rituals and customs that might extend from Thrace to the eastern confines of the Persian Empire. The development of the Amazon figure involves several recurring codes. First, bravery, almost equivalent to that of a male hero. Then, physical grace, explicitly emphasized to distinguish these warriors from mere unattractive barbarians. Greek authors often describe the Amazons as slender, with a noble bearing, wielding the bow, spear, and shield. They wear short costumes or outfits adapted to horseback riding, indicating a lifestyle associated with horsemanship, which does not correspond to classical Greek customs, but aligns with the stereotypical image of the peoples of the steppes. In this same period, the 5th century before Christ witnessed Greece in direct contact with the vast Persian Empire. The Greco-Persian Wars, occurring between 490 and 479 before Christ, abruptly awakened Athens, Sparta, and other city-states to the power of the Achaemenid Persia. Narratives about the Eastern enemies multiplied, blending real data with exotic cliches. However, for the Greeks, this vast eastern world extended well beyond Anatolia. It encompassed territories stretching to the Indus Valley and northward to the Eurasian steppe. In this context, the word Saka, used by the Persians to designate certain groups of nomadic horsemen, sometimes identified with the Scythians, began to circulate among Greek scholars. Herodotus of Halicarnassus, considered the father of history, provides valuable testimony about the geography of these distant lands and the practices of their inhabitants. Among other observations, he reports the possibility that women from these nomadic peoples fought alongside the men. Herodotus mentions in his histories the lifestyle of the Scythians, whom he sometimes calls Scythians, sometimes Sakas, depending on the regions. He describes a pastoral and equestrian civilization, highly mobile, living from raids, transhumance, and trade. Women would actively participate in the defense of the territory, sometimes marrying only after having killed an opponent in combat, a detail that symbolizes a complete moral reversal of the traditional Greek model. This type of anecdote, reported by the famous historian, fuels hypotheses about a possible historical root of the Amazon myth. Perhaps tales from travelers who encountered female horse riders wielding bows informed the Greek imagination long before Herodotus. In the 5th century, whether it be theater, mythical narratives, or testimonies about the barbarian world, the figure of the Oriental warrior woman tends to intermingle with the Amazonian archetype, reinforcing the confusion between legendary accounts and ethnographic facts. Moreover, the Achaemenid Persia, whose cultural influence extends over vast territories, also disseminates its own narratives. While the concept of female sakas is not always attested in direct Persian sources, the presence of cavalry peoples and the recurrence of female royal or aristocratic figures, for example, Queen Atossa, daughter of Cyrus the Great, or Queen Tamiris in other authors' accounts, point to a tradition where, at times, power and warfare were not exclusively the men's domain. The Greeks, observing from afar and often through the prism of hostility, tended to exaggerate certain traits. Thus, the women of Eastern peoples, whether Persians, Sakas, or associated with other ethnicities, were sometimes depicted as freer, more warlike, or stranger than they probably were in reality. This exaggeration, paired with mythical tradition, feeds the belief that the Amazon is the archetype of the daring female warrior hailing from the eastern fringes of the civilized world. Even if these accounts may seem embellished, we know today, thanks to archaeology, that the involvement of women in military activity was not merely a literary motif. Excavated graves in the steppes reveal that nomadic women wielding bows, lances, and other weapons with proven skill did exist. To understand this reality, researchers closely examined excavation sessions in several key regions, including the Altai, at the border between present-day Russia, Mongolia, China, and Kazakhstan, and the Don Valley in southern Russia. The Altai, with its steep mountains and high-altitude grasslands, has preserved numerous kurgans, these characteristic burial mounds of the steppe peoples. Kurgans often consist of a mound of earth, covering a burial chamber made of wood or stone, designed to house the deceased, or sometimes multiple deceased, and their grave goods. In Scythian culture, these grave goods can include weapons, harness elements, decorative objects, as well as food offerings. Successive excavations in the 20th and 21st centuries have revealed within these graves the presence of mixed assemblages, delicately crafted jewelry, bracelets, necklaces, earrings, lying alongside weapons intended for hunting or combat. Traditionally, before the rise of modern analytical methods, it often happened that some graves equipped with weapons were automatically attributed to men. However, careful assessment of skeletons through osteology has highlighted a surprising fact. Nearly 30% of these burials with weapons actually belong to female individuals. This statistic, now well supported by multiple studies, challenges the long-held view that warfare in the Eurasian steppes was exclusively the domain of men. Numerous studies, based on detailed observation of bone morphology, have confirmed these conclusions. Osteological clues are among the most explicit. The skeletons of these women show signs corresponding to pathologies related to intensive horse riding, such as wear in certain areas of the femur or pelvis, as well as regular handling of the bow, identified by the presence of striations or small bone growths on the arm and shoulder bones. In specialized vocabulary, the term bow unstringing is sometimes used to describe the microskeletal lesions observed near the elbow or on the radius, attesting to the repeated tension of the bowstring. These pathologies, both subtle and revealing, testify to a long-term, possibly daily practice. Not only did these women excel in archery, but they also engaged in intense equestrian practice, associated with herd guarding and active participation in conflicts. The Sarmatians, emerging as a group related to or descended from certain Scythian branches, continued this equestrian lifestyle during the following centuries. Their sphere of influence, notable from the 3rd century before Christ to the early centuries CE, perpetuates this tradition of armed women, as evidenced by numerous tombs excavated in the Pontic steppe. The interest in these funerary discoveries is not only archaeological, it sheds light on the historical debate around a possible real inspiration for the Greek myth of the Amazons. Indeed, the image of warrior women participating in plundering and protecting their clan seems anything but purely fictional. Ancient Greek accounts, although peppered with legendary anecdotes, might have relied on direct or indirect observations of the reality of the steppes. Modern researchers endeavor, however, to distinguish the idealized interpretation of ancient authors from concrete archaeological documentation. While some traits noted by Herodotus, such as the claim that women do not abandon the hunt until they have killed at least 3 enemies, remain unverifiable, the armed tombs of women, rich in decorative elements, corroborate the idea of societies in which female participation in military activities and the valorization of female courage were not rare. Among the major discoveries that have particularly captured the attention of the public and the scientific community is the unearthing in 2019-2020 of a kurgan in the Davidsa region of Russia. First published in Archaeology magazine, the initial analyses of this site caused a stir, notably because they confirmed once again the presence of at least one woman buried with a complete offensive equipment. The Davidsa kurgan is located not far from the Don River, a basin whose strategic importance has been crucial since antiquity. The conditions of preservation, favored by the climate and the nature of the tomb itself, allowed for the recovery of remarkably intact artifacts, among which were arrowheads, a quiver, and projectile equipment. Fragments of jewelry were also catalogued, attesting to an elite keen to assert its rank through goldsmithing. Preliminary osteological analyses on the remains from Davidsa revealed that the female individual in question displayed several distinctive signs of a life spent in the saddle. The hip and knee joints showed specific wear, which can occur when one spends long hours on horseback. Moreover, a study of her clavicle and arm indicated marks corresponding to the regular use of a bow. These findings align with research conducted elsewhere in Russia and Central Asia, where tombs of armed women have been excavated repeatedly since the 1990s. However, Davidsa provides an additional example, offering a precise dating around the end of the 4th or 3rd century before Christ, according to early dendrochronology results and funeral furniture analysis, and reinforcing statistics about the proportion of potentially warrior women in these societies. During the excavation of the Davidsa kurgan, archaeologists employed modern techniques such as photogrammetry and X-ray fluorescence spectrometry to map the soil composition, detect any disturbances, and measure the distribution of metals in the mound. These cutting-edge methods facilitate the precise location of usual weapons, like the short sword or the aconakis, a Scythian sidearm, and help distinguish between natural corrosion and intentional deposits. This innovative approach confirmed that the set of objects had not been altered after the initial burial. In other words, the tomb's owner was indeed the sole recipient of these weapons, not an indirect heir or a mere symbolic utensil. Researchers were also able to establish that the combination of weapons and jewelry in a single tomb was not exceptional, but rather a recurring phenomenon in this region and era. Finally, to complete the analyses, carbon-14 dating refined the chronology. They placed the burial of the warrior woman from Davidsa at a time when the Scytho-Sarmatian culture was experiencing major changes, marked by trade exchanges with the Greek colonies north of the Black Sea and the increasing military pressure from other nomadic tribes. Thus, while proving crucial to our understanding of steppe societies, this kurgan also sheds light on the broader geopolitical evolution in which these nomadic peoples were involved. Trade routes, whether part of the Silk Road, which would later extend further east, or corridors connecting the Greek world with the interior of Eurasia, played a vital role in the enrichment of the Scythian and Sarmatian elites. Thanks to their horses and military expertise, these groups managed to control, albeit sometimes intermittently, vast territories and impose tributes on sedentary populations located on their periphery. In the 5th century before Christ, Greek civilization began a period of profound transformations, marked by the rise of Athens, the development of democracy, and the emergence of a flourishing literary production. It was also a time when the figure of the Amazons, passed down through epic tradition, intrigued historians, geographers, and poets. The classical antiquity period between the 5th and 4th centuries before Christ, followed by the Hellenistic period between the 4th and 1st centuries before Christ, saw an increase in literary and artistic testimonies continuously transforming the image of these warrior women. Writers sought not only to locate the homeland of the Amazons with each conquest and new exploration, but also to integrate their story into the grand narratives shaping the identity of the Greek world. Through the works of Ephorus and Strabo, and through anecdotes related to Alexander the Great and the famous Queen Thalestris, a cultural landscape emerged in which the Amazons became a major theme, capable of symbolizing both alterity and military power. In the 4th century before Christ, the historian Ephorus of Syme played a decisive role in the transmission of legends concerning the Amazons. Originally from Ionia on the western coast of Asia Minor, he was part of a tradition of historians and legographers keen on gathering and organizing narratives related to the legendary and mythological origins of the surrounding peoples. Writing in Greek, Ephorus delved into universal history, from mythical times up to his own era, intending to offer a broad, almost geographical view of the known world. Thus, he compiled various accounts on the real or supposed location of the Amazons, trying to determine if these warrior women originally lived north of the Black Sea in the Caucasus region or further east towards Central Asia. The contradictions in the sources, fueled by explorers and merchants' tales, led him to propose various hypotheses, portraying the Amazons as a wandering people or as having moved due to multiple wars. For Ephorus, this shifting geography also demonstrated the constant fascination these women exerted on the entire Greek world. They represented a permanent otherness whose location shifted based on military and political developments. A century later, Strabo, a geographer and historian from Amasea in Asia Minor, revisited these traditions while scrutinizing them through his own method of inquiry. His work, the Geography, was written under Roman rule, but it heavily drew on earlier sources to depict the world that emerged from Alexander the Great's conquests. Strabo, whose scientific concern marked a turning point compared to more strictly mythographic historians, did not entirely dismiss the hypothesis of the Amazons' real existence. He consulted various travel accounts, interrogated the legendary narratives, and compared the actual topography with descriptions inherited from poets. Thus, he sometimes located traces of the Amazons in the Caucasus region, or south of the Central Asian steppes, from where they could have launched military incursions into Anatolia or Greece. For Strabo, the geographical reinvention of the Amazons illustrated the permeability between myth and reality in the ancient world. The cartography of these territories remained vague, and the presence of nomadic or even unknown populations beyond certain borders maintained the mystery. In his writings, he gradually eliminated the most fabulous elements to promote a more rational approach, while admitting the cultural and ideological contributions that legends about these warrior women carried. At the very heart of the classical period, another major event captured the attention of ancient authors: the supposed encounter between Alexander the Great and the Queen of the Amazons, called Thalestris in some sources. Alexander, the Macedonian strategist and conqueror, managed in a decade to overthrow the Persian Empire and extend his authority to the edges of India. His personal epic, punctuated by rumors and semi-legendary accounts, was bound to intersect with the Amazons. Several authors, including Diodorus of Sicily and Quintus Curtius, report that near Hyrcania, a region bordering the Caspian Sea, roughly corresponding to northern Iran today, Alexander received a visit from a proud queen leading a contingent of female soldiers. This queen, in some accounts, is named Thalestris, or Menethia in other versions, and is said to have come to propose an alliance or a carnal union, depending on the versions, to bear a child endowed with Alexander's martial qualities. Historically, the plausibility of this encounter is widely debated by modern specialists. Already in antiquity, some authors doubted the reality of this episode. Some suggested it was a pure invention intended to exalt Alexander's heroic image. Victor over Darius III and ruler of a vast territory, the Macedonian sovereign was portrayed in this account as the equal of mythical heroes, capable of making contact even with mysterious warrior queens. Others saw, on the contrary, confusion arising from accounts of mercenaries or local populations reporting the presence of female fighters among certain Scythian tribes near the Caspian Sea. In any case, the myth of an alliance or encounter between Alexander and Thalestris gained significant political importance. It cemented the quasi-superhuman reputation of the sovereign, while emphasizing the absolute conquest he exercised over the known world, including over the female people perceived as the most formidable. The Hellenistic period, which began immediately after Alexander's death in 323, before Christ and spanned about 3 centuries, extends and amplifies this interest. The new kingdoms born from the partition of the empire, such as Ptolemaic Egypt or the Seleucid dynasty in Asia, perpetuate a Greco-Macedonian culture where the reference to ancient myths remains omnipresent. It is in this environment that the iconography of the Amazons spreads on a large scale, used both as a decorative motif and as a symbol of Greek victory over barbarism or exoticism. Artist workshops flourish in Pergamon in Asia Minor, as well as in other major cities like Alexandria or Antioch. From monumental friezes to villa mosaics, including bronze statuary, the figure of the Amazon presents a range of postures combining both feminine grace and warrior vigor. Her characteristic attributes, the bow, the double shield, the exomis, a short tunic, become easily recognizable to the public of the time. One of the most well-known examples remains the frieze of the Pergamon altar, erected in the 2nd century before Christ under the reign of the Attalids, a local dynasty aspiring to rival the great Hellenistic powers. This altar, dedicated to Zeus and Athena, features monumental reliefs depicting scenes of Gigantomachy, the battle of gods against giants, but also includes references to the war against the Amazons and other symbols of mythical conflicts. Although fragmentary, these representations give the Amazon a privileged place in the collective imagination. Her role is both that of a formidable enemy, highlighting the bravery of those who combat her, and an allegorical image of the external threat that Greek power or the Olympian gods eventually subdue. In those times, when each kingdom seeks to position itself as the legitimate heir of Alexander and the great Greek traditions, Amazonian iconography fully participates in the official discourse. It allows the claim to the heroic continuity of rulers and suggests that, just like Heracles or Achilles, the Hellenistic kings are capable of replicating legendary exploits. In the course of the 1st century before Christ, on the brink of Roman imperial expansion, the Amazons continued to exert a certain fascination among authors and the public. First, Diodorus of Sicily, a Greek historian active in Rome in the second half of the 1st century before Christ, closely examines legends from Asia Minor and beyond. In his work, Bibliotheca Historica, he dedicates several passages to the description of ancient matriarchal societies, which he sometimes links historically to the existence of the Amazons. Although he writes at a time of transition, when the Roman Republic is giving way to an imperial regime, Diodorus does not hesitate to place the Amazons within a global narrative of conquests and collapses. For him, it is essential to understand how these warrior women fit into the long chain of Eastern conflicts, where Homeric tales and local traditions are already intertwined. His account, with a willingly dramatic tone, is based on older sources from Greek authors and on testimonies going back, according to him, to the campaigns of Alexander the Great. However, his vision is already tinged by the idea of a mysterious Orient, where the Amazons represent a formidable challenge to the patriarchal order. A few decades later, Pliny the Elder, born in 23 CE and died in 79, also takes up this motif in his Natural History, a vast compendium of knowledge about the world. Pliny, an officer and scholar, travels the Roman Empire and compiles vast amounts of ethnographic, botanical, and geographical information. In his eyes, the Amazons belong to this exoticism that makes the distant lands renowned. He locates them on the periphery of the known world, in poorly explored regions like the Caucasus or along the eastern borders of Scythia, i.e., north of the Black Sea. For Pliny, revisiting these myths in light of Roman geography strengthens an imperial discourse. The empire, by encompassing or holding at bay these extraordinary peoples, extends its field of control while feeding the curiosity of readers. The Amazons, with their proven character as untamed warriors, thus complete the gallery of exotic images that Rome likes to exhibit to celebrate both its power and universality. Roman spectacles and triumphs, where captives from all horizons are willingly displayed, thus enrich themselves with the idea that beyond the borders there exist fierce women soldiers ready to challenge the legions. In this context, the repeated mention of the Amazons in literature or official arts is part of a form of imperial propaganda. In the time of Augustus, the Pax Romana is presented as a triumph over barbarism. Authors and speakers can then contrast Roman discipline with the fantasized image of societies perceived as disordered or contrary to the natural order. Yet, some poets or rhetoricians, fascinated, evoke the bravery of these women and see in it an echo of the legendary Roman masculinity. If Rome has defeated or could defeat even women warriors, it proves the unquestionable superiority of the imperial armies. It's a subtle discourse between fascination, a desire for exoticism, and an affirmation of Roman strength. Meanwhile, in the heart of Asia Minor, the city of Ephesus cultivates a very particular narrative, the mythical founding of the Temple of Artemis by the Amazons. Artemis, often associated with hunting, nature, and virginity, already stands as a goddess whose cult values female power. According to a tradition reported by several ancient authors, including Pindar, who is older, then relayed towards our late Republican and imperial period, a group of Amazons, fleeing a military defeat or in search of a new sanctuary, would have arrived on the Ionian coast. They would have erected an altar there, or even laid the first foundations of the Temple of Artemis, which would become one of the 7 wonders of the world and the religious heart of Ephesus. This legendary version justifies the ancientness of the Artemis cult and grants it an almost pre-Hellenic aura. From the Roman perspective, which has integrated Asia Minor into its provinces, the recovery of this legend offers a useful historical depth to magnify the region and the sanctuary. The Temple of Artemis in Ephesus is regularly visited by Roman dignitaries and becomes an essential stop for any cultured person traveling in the East. The historians and geographers of the empire, whether Greek or Latin, establish a link between the prestige of Ephesus and these eternal feminine figures, whose ardor in combat, special piety, and legendary independence are remembered. Following the rise of the empire, echoes of the Amazon spirit can be found in certain historical queens who, very real, vigorously opposed Roman domination. The case of Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe in present-day Great Britain, is one of the most remarkable. Around 60 Anno Domini, Boudica led a rebellion against Roman occupation, exasperated by the abuses suffered by her people and her own family. Roman historians Tacitus and Dio Cassius describe her appearance, often idealized or dramatized, and emphasize her courage. These accounts inadvertently bring Boudica's image closer to the archetype of the Amazon, a proud, combative woman ready to stand up to an army renowned for its invincibility. Moreover, the fact that she commanded numerous troops, likely including both men and women, arouses amazement, even fear in the Roman imagination, so much so that some, retrospectively, associate her with a new incarnation of an Amazon queen. Later texts, in a less historical and more literary vein, do not hesitate to explicitly associate her with these legendary heroines, despite the centuries separating Greek myths from the Celtic realities of the 1st century Anno Domini. Another striking example of the connection between historical and mythological figures can be found with Septimia Bathzabai, better known as Zenobia, the famous queen of Palmyra. Located in present-day Syria, Palmyra was a crossroads city that, in the 3rd century Anno Domini, took advantage of the progressive weakening of Roman authority to expand its influence. Zenobia, reigning between 267 and 272, openly defied the power of Rome and managed to build an ephemeral empire stretching from Egypt to Anatolia. Her aura was immense. She presented herself as a descendant of the famous Cleopatra VII, mastered the art of diplomacy, surrounded herself with scholars, and minted her own coins. For later Roman historians, she was the quintessential example of an ambitious Eastern queen, formidable on the battlefield. Like a true Amazon, Zenobia rode horses, wielded weapons, and inspired both respect and fear among her soldiers. Although the explicit comparison with the Amazons is not always made in contemporary texts, later Byzantine and Latin chroniclers sometimes describe her as a modern equivalent of these ancient myths, highlighting her independence and her challenge to the empire. After her defeat by Emperor Aurelian in 272, Zenobia entered Roman memory as an exotic sovereign, a reflection of an oriental peril. Over time, each of her representations took on legendary hues, granting her a special rank among the great female figures of late antiquity. In a different vein, more discreet, yet crucial for understanding the evolution of the myth, early Christian authors also drew from the universe of the Amazons to provide spiritual or moral metaphors. As the Roman Empire gradually transitioned to Christianity under Constantine in the early 4th century, references to Greco-Roman mythology did not disappear, they metamorphosed. The Church Fathers, particularly those well-versed in classical culture, continued to cite Homer, or evoke legendary characters like the Amazons, but with a new angle. Sometimes, these warrior women served as a counter-example. They were depicted as a society devoted to idolatry and the inversion of natural roles, which was ultimately punished. Other times, especially in sermons or hagiographic texts, the Amazon faded behind the praise of a saint or martyr capable of courage and spiritual fortitude. The connections were more implicit. They did not literally speak of armor or bows, but depicted fervent women defying pagan imperial authority, enduring torture without weakening, and inspiring a wide conversion movement. This is observed, for example, in some accounts of Saints Perpetua and Felicity in the early 3rd century, or other martyrs associated with spiritual resistance. Though the idea was not to align these saints on a military level, the notion of paradoxically virile bravery embodied in female figures subtly recalled the way Greco-Roman authors described the Amazons as women breaking out of the conventional social mold. The transition to late antiquity, with the progressive fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476, did not make the myth of the Amazons disappear, but transformed it. Influenced by the new religious context, authors of this period interpreted the legendary warriors in an ambivalent manner, sometimes to emphasize the restored masculine superiority, other times to admire, nonetheless, feminine strength when it aligned with moral virtue. The positioning varied according to the more or less pagan or Christian tendencies of the author, and the rhetoric adopted to explain the fall of great civilizations. At the turn of the Middle Ages, between the 6th and the 14th century CE, the figure of the fierce female warrior continued its path outside classic ancient narratives. While the Greek and Roman heritage of the Amazons continued to feed the collective imagination in Europe, Byzantine chroniclers and Arab cartographers, as well as some Chinese scholars and Scandinavian poets, reinterpreted this figure to confront the realities and beliefs of their time. This period, often labeled as the Global Middle Ages, proves to be less closed off than previously thought. Travelers moved between the West, the Arab Muslim world, and the reaches of Asia, carrying with them paintings, legends, and rumors. In this context, the myth of warrior women, sometimes connected to the Amazons of Greco-Roman tradition, reappears in local forms, adapted to the necessities and curiosities of successive empires. The Byzantine chronicles, first of all, constitute a vast body of work, from the 6th to the 14th century. One notable source is the historian Nikephoros, often identified as Nikephoros I, Patriarch of Constantinople in the early 9th century, although several Byzantine authors bore this name. In his work, composed in the tradition of the imperial court, he occasionally mentions these legendary female warriors. The Byzantines, direct heirs of the Eastern Roman Empire, indeed preserved a significant legacy of ancient tales, including the famous Mesoamerican depicted in Greek art. However, in the Byzantine context, the image of these combatants is tinged with religious and diplomatic considerations. They are no longer just mythological tales, but phenomena sometimes attempted to be localized in real geography. The presence of numerous tribes on the edges of the Caucasus or the steppes of Central Asia greatly interested Constantinople, which alternately feared or courted these populations. Chroniclers like Nikephoros refer to ancient traditions passed down from antiquity, reinterpreting them in light of current military alliances or threats to the empire. In parallel with these Byzantine accounts, the Arab maps of the 12th century, most notably stemming from the work of the geographer Al-Idris, fueled the imagination around a land of women located, according to some, in the Caucasus region. Al-Idris was a learned traveler who worked at the court of the Norman king Roger II of Sicily. He compiled a major geographical work around 1154, often called the Tabula Rogeriana. In his descriptions, he incorporates not only his own observations, but also numerous oral testimonies and older written sources, deriving both from the Greek heritage and from Muslim explorations toward Asia. In his work, the Caucasus appears as an unknown borderland, where different communities meet, sometimes perceived as hostile or mysterious. The idea of an exclusively female country, or a kingdom ruled by women, reflects both the curiosity and the part of fantasy that these distant regions evoke. To some Arab scholars, the possibility of such a kingdom partly stems from ancient Amazon legends, which might have migrated or perpetuated in these isolated territories. Meanwhile, in Asia, the chronicles of the Tang dynasty, between 618 and 907, found in compilations like the Book of Tang or the New Book of Tang, also mention female kingdoms located in inner Asian territories or sometimes further east, at the borders of Tibet. According to these Chinese texts, there are small principalities governed by queens who only allow male presence under strict conditions, for instance, for procreation or diplomacy. It is difficult to determine whether these accounts describe precise ethnographic realities, or if they belong to a widespread literary motif comparable to that of the Amazons. Nonetheless, these documents reveal a recurring fascination with the idea of female warrior societies perceived as the ultimate otherness. To explain this curiosity, it is worth highlighting that Tang China maintained commercial relations with various regions, notably through the Silk Road. Merchants, Buddhist monks, and also diplomats shared their astonishments. Thus, any slightly peculiar news about a foreign population could find resonance in the official chronicles, eager to inventory the surrounding lands. The parallels between these female kingdoms mentioned in the Tang, the countries of women according to Arab authors, and the Byzantine tradition of an Amazonian heritage form a set of colorful hypotheses that circulate throughout the medieval Old World. Certainly, the importance of writing varies between cultures, but when it comes to describing mysterious societies of female warriors, the same narrative structure recurs: geographical isolation, the near absence of men, the art of war mastered by women, and the claim of political and cultural autonomy. To medieval readers, often dominated by strict moral and religious codes regarding the place of women in society, the hypothetical existence of these countries appears both dangerous and fascinating. It corresponds to the overthrow of a social order while becoming a literary motif that attracts readers eager for exoticism. In Northern Europe, simultaneously, the phenomenon of Scandinavian shield maidens, related to the Valkyries in Norse mythology, raises similar questions. The most detailed written sources concerning these Nordic warriors date mainly from the period between the 12th and 13th centuries, when the Icelandic sagas began to be written. However, the oral tradition that precedes them would date back at least to the 8th or 9th century during the Viking era. These are women who fight alongside men, using shields and weapons equal to their male counterparts. Their image appears in some texts as that of formidable warriors, capable of rivaling the greatest heroes. Shield maidens sometimes occupy roles as advisors or oracles, endowed with an ambiguous status. They straddle the traditional female social role, management of the home, transmission of knowledge, and direct involvement in war. It may seem strange to see tales of Amazons resurface in the Caucasus and shield maidens in medieval Scandinavia simultaneously. Yet, the need to link the inexplicable or the surpassing of gender norms to an already known myth has clearly worked in collective imaginations. Scandinavian warriors have often been compared, in some popular writings and even in some works by medieval Christian scholars, to the Amazons whose memory was inherited through Latin and Greek narratives. The assimilation occurs on the level of courage and arms, but also because, in both cases, these women evolve in reputedly wild or northern spaces. The Caucasian steppe, like the Viking lands, constitutes in the medieval mind a frontier compared to the civilization of the great empires. However, this comparison is not systematically organized. It is more of a symbolic connection. When Europeans, whether travelers or scholars, hear about a group of female warriors in the northern forests or islands, they perceive an echo of the ancient legend. It is known that grand sagas such as the saga of Hervor describe women wielding swords and embarking on heroic quests. Hervor, for example, is a figure who disguises herself as a man to accomplish feats. Although she does not have the status of an Amazon per se, the confusion easily operates in the eyes of those who associate all female warrior behavior with the image of the daughters of Ares, the Greek god of war, as they appear in ancient stories. This Scandinavian reinterpretation sometimes fits into a broader context of cultural exchanges with the Byzantine Empire. It is known that Varangians, Vikings in the service of the Eastern Empire, traveled the Russian rivers to reach Constantinople, serving as the emperor's personal guard. Through these contacts, some stories of shield maidens and Viking exploits may have been transmitted or reformulated, fueling new Byzantine hypotheses about the existence of Amazons in the north, in addition to those presumed in the Caucasus. Faced with these multiple resonances, one might wonder what is pure fiction or has a historical basis. Recent archaeological work in Northern Europe has revealed tombs of women buried with warrior attributes, including swords, spears, or shields. Without necessarily proving the existence of an organized caste of shield maidens, these discoveries show that women could exercise a warrior function, or, at least, be buried with military status. In the heart of the Renaissance, between the 15th and 17th centuries, Europe undergoes a period of unprecedented intellectual upheaval. The great maritime discoveries and the rise of a new humanistic vision of knowledge transform the view of the world, including the legendary figures bequeathed by Greco-Roman antiquity. Among these ancient tales, that of the Amazon sparks renewed interest among Italian scholars. The image of armed and independent women nourishes intense debates in learned society, as well as fuels the collective imagination. The humanists delve into Greek and Latin texts, which they seek out, translate, and comment on, using them as a privileged medium to reflect on the status of women in European society of that time. At the same period, colonial expansion and the first travelogues of the New World raise new questions. When Orellana's expedition in 1541 ventures into the heart of the Amazon rainforest, reports tell of female warriors capable of rivaling their male counterparts. These new encounters, mixed with memories of antiquity, finish popularizing the Amazonian motif. Finally, in the Baroque period of the 17th century, painters and architects seize the figure of the Amazon, which becomes an ambiguous symbol of authority, associated with the great European monarchies. How did this myth between real discoveries and artistic reinventions gain such a scope during the Renaissance and the Age of Discoveries? First of all, it is in the Italy of the Quattrocento in the 15th century that the rediscovery of ancient texts takes place. Scholars like Poggio Bracciolini, Leonardo Bruni, or Marsilio Ficino dedicate themselves to the search and translation of forgotten manuscripts, which, once unearthed, revive enthusiasm for Greco-Roman culture. Homer, Herodotus, or Diodorus of Sicily become valuable references again, and their tales of Amazons, sometimes based on historical elements, sometimes exaggerated for the pleasure of fiction, intrigue an intellectual milieu passionate about philological study and critical commentary. Beyond mere literary curiosity, the figure of the warrior woman appears as an ideal starting point for nourishing a reflection on the relationship between the sexes. The Renaissance sees the famous Quarrel of Women, a vast debate about the female place in society, equality or not with men, and the legitimacy of female power. In this context, the Amazons represent a conceptual puzzle. According to tradition, these warriors lived without husbands, fending for themselves in a social system that inverted the usual roles. Should they be considered merely as a literary fantasy, or rather as a historical example, certainly distant, of women's capacity to hold the battlefield, govern, and survive independently? Italian humanists also wonder whether, beyond mythical writings, there wasn't a kernel of historical truth among the peoples of the ancient world. Some explore the Scythian territory, mentioned by Herodotus and his successors, attempting to draw a possible justification for the existence of these warriors. Others prefer to interpret the Amazons as a moral or political symbol. They would embody both seduction and danger, emancipation and threat. Each translator, commentator, and philosopher strives to give new meaning to these millennia-old stories, thus contributing to broadening the Renaissance's field of study and multiplying angles of analysis. This intellectual ferment is reflected in several circles of the Italian peninsula, which maintain a constant dialogue with the rest of learned Europe. In this climate of passionate curiosity about antiquity, a major upheaval occurred: the discovery of the Americas and the gradual circulation of information about the peoples of the New World. The explorations of the Spanish and Portuguese conquistadors from the late 15th century fueled European discourse with surprising, sometimes exaggerated stories, where exotic nature, unusual fauna, and local customs fascinated or frightened. In 1541, the expedition led by Francisco de Orellana in the Amazon marked a decisive turning point. Initially, Orellana accompanied Gonzalo Pizarro in a vast exploration expedition from Quito, in present-day Ecuador. The difficulties multiplied, forcing Orellana to separate from the group to navigate down the Great River, hoping to reach the Atlantic or find other supply routes. During this epic journey, filled with ambushes, negotiations, and tropical diseases, Orellana's men heard of tribes led by armed women. In their correspondence and logbooks, the Spaniards claimed to have been attacked, or at least threatened, by these warrior leaders, who, according to these accounts, displayed formidable courage. Upon hearing this story, the association with the Greek Amazons was immediate in the minds of Europeans. The river on which Orellana navigated was officially named Amazon, precisely as a reference to this idea of formidable women. Returning to Europe, Orellana's account sparked immense excitement. In salons and courts, there was debate over whether the conquistador had truly encountered such warriors, or if he wanted to embellish his adventure with a touch of exoticism and propaganda. Regardless, the name of the river stuck, and this episode opened a new chapter in the history of the reception of the myth. European letters now uniquely combined ancient memory with distant lands that had just been mapped. Numerous Renaissance authors, historians, and poets rushed to comment on the veracity of this account. Some, immersed in classical tradition, saw it as proof that all Greek legends had a basis in reality. Others, skeptical, criticized an exaggeration intended to make the adventure more worthy of interest and to secure financial support and royal recognition. In any case, the toponymy, naming an entire river Amazon, reflected the enthusiasm and fascination that this myth aroused in Europe during the Age of Discovery. As the 16th century progressed, the figure of the Amazon became more prominent on the cultural scene. Kings and queens commissioned tapestries, paintings, and decors where the legendary warriors appeared either in epic battles or in triumphant poses. This phenomenon intensified with the arrival of the first Baroque styles at the beginning of the 17th century. Baroque art, characterized by a strong preference for movement, contrast, and expressiveness, was perfectly suited to staging Amazons in action. Scenes of battles or processions offered dynamic compositions, enhanced by the chromatic richness and virtuosity of the artists. At the same time, monarchical authority sought to legitimize its power by mobilizing prestigious allegories. Thus, Amazons sometimes became a veiled emblem of the strong state. In court propaganda, these heroines represented power, military discipline, and boldness, three qualities that could be claimed by a sovereign, or, if necessary, by a sovereigness. The Flemish painter Peter Paul Rubens perfectly embodied this trend to update ancient themes to glorify the monarchy. He conceived an entire series of large compositions blending Greco-Roman mythology with the celebration of reigning families. In his paintings, Rubens enjoyed intensifying the expression of emotions, exalting the muscular strength of warriors while maintaining a pronounced sensuality among the female protagonists. When he depicted Amazons, he emphasized both their warrior bravery and their sculptural femininity. By doing so, he offered patrons a double message. On one hand, the capacity for struggle and resilience. On the other, aesthetic suavité and the power of fascination. This paradox made Amazonian iconography particularly popular in the palaces of Baroque Europe, where there was a desire to stage power in its most grandiose forms. Princes and princesses recognized themselves in this image, both formidable and refined, a blend of martial virtues and aristocratic elegance. Another important aspect of Baroque iconography lies in the use of the Amazonian figure as an allegory of female monarchy itself. At a time when there was still some reluctance to see a woman on the throne, a reluctance more pronounced in some kingdoms than in others, the Amazons provided a fictitious yet nonetheless impressive precedent of women capable of ruling and commanding armies. Thus, during the first half of the 17th century, in the courts of Anne of Austria in France or Elizabeth I of England, even though the latter died in 1603, her image remained extremely vivid in the following decades. The comparison with mythical heroines was commonly employed to consolidate royal legitimacy. The engravings circulating at the time not only showed glorious battles, but also portraits of queens flanked by figures of Amazons, as if to signify that they were carrying on that ancestral flame of female greatness. At the same time, the debates arising from the querelle des femmes, the quarrel of women, continued in new forms in the 17th century. The scholars, both men and women, who expressed themselves through moral treatises, plays, or poetic narratives, frequently drew from mythology to illustrate their arguments. the example of an Amazon, accused by some of personifying tyranny, glorified by others as models of independence, appeared in discussions about the allegedly inferior or conversely equal nature of the female sex. Gradually, the myth of the Amazon, drawn from Greek antiquity, reshaped and distorted by late medieval controversies, rediscovered and celebrated during the Renaissance, echoed the aspirations and contradictions of a Europe in transition. The Baroque sensibility, particularly attuned to the dynamics of chiaroscuro and the expression of extreme passions, found in the story of these warrior women an ideal ground to communicate the tension between rigor and sensuality, heroism and transgression. In the 21st century, the rapid advances in archaeology and related sciences have significantly refined our understanding of the past. Research conducted in recent decades has unveiled new clues about the existence of female warriors in antiquity, affirming the idea that ancient narratives about them were not merely literary motifs. The year 2024 promises to be particularly fruitful for research, especially in Azerbaijan, where ongoing excavations in certain late Bronze Age necropolises have already received considerable attention in the specialized press. Several articles in The Guardian and Archaeology News online magazine report that atypical tombs attributed to wealthy armed women have been unearthed in the Caucasus region, not far from the mountain foothills bordering the interior plains. The equipment pieces uncovered include stylized swords, intricately crafted bronze arrowheads, as well as shields partially decorated with symbols whose meanings remain to be clarified. Equally noteworthy is that the burials contain status jewelry, gold necklaces, earrings inset with amethyst, or other semi-precious stones, highlighting the high social position of these interred individuals. Furthermore, the combination of these material clues, weapons, jewelry, offerings of precious objects, redirects attention even more toward the existence of a female elite enjoying not only economic prestige, but also real military recognition. Dating carried out using usual methods, particularly carbon-14 dating coupled with the typology of local ceramics, places these burials between the end of the second millennium and the beginning of the first millennium before Christ. This chronological range, corresponding to the late Bronze Age and the very early stages of the Iron Age, seems crucial as it coincides with major transformations in material culture in the region, marked by the introduction of more advanced metallurgical techniques and the rise of structured political entities. The presence of superior quality armaments, including body armor that would have given the wearer, or in this case, the wearer, a clear advantage on a battlefield, reinforces the idea that these women were part of a ruling group or a warrior caste, likely to stand out in local power struggles. Archaeologists working on site have already announced their intention to carry out complementary DNA analyses and to extend excavations to unexplored areas of the site, hoping to find more similar witnesses. The ultimate goal is to build a sufficiently large sample to measure the actual extent of this female warrior phenomenon on a regional scale. The global interest these excavations generate is easily understood. Not only do they shed light on a still poorly known period, but they also offer the prospect of placing women at the heart of the political, military, and social dynamics of antiquity. The figure of the ancient warrior woman, long neglected or relegated to the rank of a marginal myth, thus regains its rights under the spotlight of modern science and forces a revision of certain classic interpretations. However, caution is advised. On the one hand, not all women buried with weapons necessarily participated in combat, and on the other, the absence of severe injuries on some skeletons does not prove they were merely votive deposits. Archaeologists are therefore striving to cross-reference different clues, genetic, isotopic, anthropological, and taphonomic analyses, to sketch a portrait that escapes any hasty conclusions. Finally, the multi-generational character evoked at several sites in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus indicates that this was not an isolated phenomenon. The mention in juxtaposed tombs of women of different ages with traces of horse riding on the pelvic bones, as sometimes revealed by microtomographic analyses, suggests the idea of equestrian training passed on from adolescence. This detail nuances the romantic vision of the solitary Amazon. It is possible that these women collectively participated in defensive or even offensive strategies and shared common training. Even today, excavation teams continue to explore partially collapsed kurgans, collecting fragments of earrings, spearheads, or horse harnesses, elements they compare to those discovered in Azerbaijan or in the Don region. As analyses are refined thanks to 3D imaging and paleogenetics, the understanding of these networks of female fighters is expected to gain depth and coherence. Through the centuries, the myth of the Amazons has crossed the borders of history and legend, fueled both by the tangible reality of warrior peoples and the limitless imagination of successive civilizations. Today, while modern science slowly exhumes the evidence of feminine bravery inscribed in the forgotten layers of time, the echo of the Amazons resonates more strongly than ever. She stands, bow raised to the skies, riding across steppes and legends, defying kingdoms, inspiring empires, and infusing our own world with a breath of immortality.